My name is Emma, and I'm here to share a story that made me question everything I thought I knew about life, faith, and the power of fasting. It's not the kind of experience you ever planned for, or even believe could happen. But looking back, it changed me in ways I never expected. It all began on a quiet Saturday afternoon. The day felt normal, peaceful even. The sky was a soft blue, with just a few clouds drifting lazily by. I had just finished a light lunch and was sitting by the window, sipping tea and making a to-do list for the week ahead. Everything felt routine, until suddenly it wasn't. I began to feel a strange tightness in my chest. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe stress or something I ate. But within minutes, the feeling intensified. My head felt light, my breathing grew shallow, and my vision began to blur. Before I could make sense of it, everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't where I thought I'd be. What happened next changed the way I see fasting, faith, and the deeper connection we have with the divine. Let me take you through this journey and what it revealed to me. When I lost consciousness, I thought it was just a fainting spell, something I'd wake up from in a few seconds. But those seconds stretched into something I couldn't explain. At first, I was aware of nothing but silence, an eerie, all-encompassing quiet. It wasn't like falling asleep or being in a dream. It was something else entirely. The sensation was both weightless and heavy at the same time, as though my body no longer existed, but my thoughts remained sharp and alive. Then, something shifted. I became aware of a strange light around me. It wasn't blinding or harsh. It was soft, like the glow of a candle, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The light wasn't just something I could see. It felt like it was wrapping around me, filling me with a warmth I couldn't describe. My first thought was, am I dreaming? But everything felt too vivid, too real. The air, or whatever I was surrounded by, seemed to hum with a faint, peaceful sound, like a melody I couldn't quite place. Then came the questions. Where was I? What was happening? My mind raced with every logical explanation I could think of. Maybe this was a side effect of passing out. Maybe it was my brain trying to cope. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more I realized this was unlike anything I'd ever known. I remember looking down, or at least, I think I did, and realizing I could see myself. Not just my physical body, but everything about me. My thoughts, my emotions, my fears, they were all visible, as if laid out in front of me like an open book. That's when I saw something, or rather someone, in the distance. A figure moving closer, bathed in the same soft light that surrounded me. My heart raced, though I couldn't feel it in the usual way. I wasn't scared exactly. It was more a mix of awe and uncertainty, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. The figure came closer, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I didn't recognize them, yet they felt familiar, like they'd known me forever. Before I could say anything, they spoke. Not with words, but in a way that resonated inside me. This is where the extraordinary began. This is where everything I thought I understood about life, fasting, and faith started to change. As the figure approached, the light around them seemed to pulse gently like it was alive. Their presence was comforting, yet it carried a weight, a significance I couldn't quite grasp. They didn't speak in the traditional sense, but somehow I understood them perfectly. It was as if their words bypassed my ears and went straight to my heart. They asked a simple question. "Do you know why you're here?" I hesitated. Here? I thought, scanning my surroundings. What did they mean? Was this some kind of dream? A hallucination? My rational mind was struggling to catch up. I wanted to respond, but I couldn't find the words. Instead of pressing for an answer, the figure simply gestured to the space around us, and suddenly, it transformed. The soft light dissolved, revealing a vivid, almost surreal landscape. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Rolling hills stretched out endlessly, covered in lush greenery that seemed to shimmer. A river wound through the valley, its water so clear I could see every pebble on the riverbed. The air was filled with the faint sound of music. No instruments, just harmonious tones that seemed to come from the world itself. Is this Heaven? I thought. But even as the question formed, it felt too simplistic. This place didn't fit any description I'd heard before. As I walked, if you could call it walking, since my feet never seemed to touch the ground, I began to notice figures moving in the distance. They weren't people in the usual sense. They were more like shapes of light, each one unique, radiating colors I'd never seen before. The figure beside me began to explain, though again, not with words. The thoughts simply formed in my mind as though they were my own. This is a place of understanding, where all things are revealed in their true form. You are here because there is something you must see. Something I must see. My curiosity grew, but so did my skepticism. Could this really be happening? Could my mind simply be playing tricks on me? As if sensing my doubt, the figure led me to the edge of the river. The water was so still it resembled glass, and when I looked into it, I didn't see my reflection. Instead, I saw moments from my life, decisions I'd made, people I'd hurt, times when I'd been selfish or unkind. It wasn't like a movie montage, it was deeper than that. I didn't just see these moments, I felt them. Every emotion, every consequence rippled through me like waves. It was overwhelming. I wanted to turn away, but the figure urged me to look closer. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if the words even left my mouth. "To understand what comes next," they replied. Suddenly, the scenes shifted. I began to see moments I didn't recognize, people I'd never met, places I'd never been. And yet, they felt connected to me, as though they were part of a larger story I hadn't been aware of. One scene stood out. A man sitting alone at a table, a single plate of food in front of him. He was praying, his hands clasped tightly, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't hear his words, but I could feel his desperation. It was a prayer for strength, for clarity, for hope. The figure spoke again. "Do you know what he's doing?" "He's praying," I replied, though it felt like an obvious answer. "He's fasting," they said. Fasting is more than abstaining from food. It is an act of surrender, a way to strip away distractions and connect with what truly matters. Few understand its power. Their words hit me like a wave. I'd heard of fasting before, mostly as a religious practice, but I'd never given it much thought. To me, it was always just a tradition, something people did out of obligation. But the way they described it, fasting was something far deeper. I began to ask questions. Why does fasting matter? How does it change anything? The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, they led me back to the river and gestured for me to look again. This time, I saw myself. I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, barely noticing the world around me. My days were a blur of routines and distractions, constantly chasing goals that never seemed to satisfy me. "This is how most people live," the figure said. Disconnected, consumed by the temporary, fasting creates space for the eternal. I started to understand. Fasting wasn't just about giving something up. It was about making room for something greater. It was a way to quiet the noise, to focus, to realign. The realization was humbling. I thought I'd been living with purpose, but seeing myself from this perspective, I realized how much of my life had been spent on autopilot. The extraordinary thing wasn't just this place or this experience, it was the insight it gave me into my own life. As I stood there, watching the river and the reflections it held, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a dramatic change. It was more like a quiet resolve, a seed of understanding that I knew would grow. This was the beginning of a transformation I couldn't yet fully grasp, but I knew one thing for certain. Fasting, in its truest sense, was far more powerful than I had ever imagined. As I stood by the shimmering river, still processing what I'd seen, the figure beside me remained silent, allowing my thoughts to run their course. My mind was a storm of questions. What did all this mean? Was it real? Was I simply hallucinating? I thought back to the man I'd seen praying and fasting. The memory lingered like a faint echo in my mind. Why was that moment so important? Why had it been shown to me? The figure must have sensed my confusion, because after a moment they finally spoke. Fasting is not about deprivation, they said. It's about clarity. The world you live in is noisy, filled with distractions that pull you away from what truly matters. Fasting silences that noise, allowing you to reconnect with yourself, with others, and with the divine. It was a beautiful explanation, but part of me still struggled to grasp it. I'd never thought much about fasting before. It always seemed like a ritualistic practice, something people did out of habit or faith. But this was different. The way the figure described it, fasting wasn't just physical, it was deeply spiritual, a way of peeling back the layers of everyday life to reveal something more profound. Is that what I need? I asked. To fast? The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, they gestured again, and the landscape around us began to shift. The lush green hills dissolved, replaced by a bustling city. I recognized it immediately. It was my city, but from a vantage point I'd never seen before. I could see the streets teeming with people, cars honking, lights flashing. It was chaos, but it was also familiar. "This is your world," the figure said. "Do you see how busy it is? How noisy?" I nodded, watching the scene unfold. Everywhere I looked, people were rushing, staring at their phones, talking over each other. It was overwhelming. Fasting is the opposite of this, the figure continued. It's stepping away from the rush, the noise, the constant need to consume. It's a way to find stillness, to listen. The word listen struck a chord with me. I realized how little I truly listened. To myself, to others, to the world around me. My life had become a series of distractions, each one pulling me further away from the things that mattered most. "But what about hunger?" I asked, almost defensively. "Isn't fasting just starving yourself? How does that help?" The figure smiled, a gesture so gentle it felt like warmth spreading through me. "Hunger is part of it," they said. "It reminds you of your limits, your humanity. But it also teaches you that you are more than your body. Hunger is temporary. What you gain through fasting is eternal." The idea made sense in a way I couldn't fully articulate. It wasn't about punishing yourself or denying your body. It was about freeing yourself from the constant cycle of wanting, consuming, and wanting more. As I stood there watching the city below, I began to notice something else. Among the chaos, there were moments of stillness. People sitting quietly on benches, families laughing together, someone helping a stranger carry their groceries. These small moments seemed to glow, like tiny pockets of peace in a noisy world. "Is that what fasting creates?" I asked. "Those moments of stillness?" "Fasting doesn't create them," the figure replied. "It helps you see them. They're always there, but you're often too distracted to notice." It was a humbling realization. I thought about my own life, how often I rushed through my days, focused on deadlines and goals, barely noticing the beauty in the world around me. Fasting, as the figure described it, wasn't about giving something up. It was about gaining something. Perspective, clarity, connection. I turned to the figure wanting to ask more, but their expression stopped me. There was something different about them now, a kind of quiet intensity that made my heart race. "What you've seen here is just the beginning," they said. "You have a choice to make. Will you continue as you were, or will you embrace the stillness and see what it reveals?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just about fasting, it was about how I wanted to live my life. Would I keep chasing distractions, or would I take the time to slow down, to listen, to truly connect? In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that this wasn't just about an extraordinary experience or a spiritual practice. It was about living with intention, about choosing to see the world in a different way. The figure began to fade, their light dissolving into the air around me. The cityscape disappeared too, replaced by the soft glow I'd seen when I first arrived. I felt a deep sense of peace, as though I'd been given a gift I couldn't yet fully comprehend. As the light dimmed and my surroundings faded, I heard the figure's voice one last time. "Remember, the answers are in the stillness. All you have to do is listen." When I opened my eyes, I was back in my chair, the sunlight streaming through the window. The tea on the table beside me had gone cold. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. But the feeling inside me, the clarity, the resolve, was too real to ignore. This experience had changed me, and I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I didn't have all the answers, but I understood one thing. Fasting wasn't just about the body. It was about the soul, about finding stillness in a chaotic world. And in that stillness, I had found something extraordinary. Looking back, I realize how much this moment changed me. It wasn't just the experience itself, it was what came after. At first, I struggled to make sense of it. Was it real? Was it some kind of vivid dream brought on by stress or a medical event? Even now, I'm not entirely sure what to believe. But one thing is certain. I've never been the same since. In the days following that experience, I began to notice things I'd previously ignored. The way sunlight filters through the trees, the sound of birds in the morning, the quiet joy in small, ordinary moments. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could see the world more clearly. Fasting, which I'd once dismissed as just another ritual, took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just about fasting, it was about how I wanted to live my life. Would I keep chasing distractions, or would I take the time to slow down, to listen, to truly connect? In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that this wasn't just about an extraordinary experience or a spiritual practice. It was about living with intention, about choosing to see the world in a different way. The figure began to fade, their light dissolving into the air around me. The cityscape disappeared too, replaced by the soft glow I'd seen when I first arrived. I felt a deep sense of peace, as though I'd been given a gift I couldn't yet fully comprehend. As the light dimmed and my surroundings faded, I heard the figure's voice one last time. Remember, the answers are in the stillness. All you have to do is listen. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my chair, the sunlight streaming through the window. The tea on the table beside me had gone cold. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. But the feeling inside me, the clarity, the resolve, was too real to ignore. This experience had changed me, and I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I didn't have all the answers, but I understood one thing. Fasting wasn't just about the body, it was about the soul, about finding stillness in a chaotic world. And in that stillness, I had found something extraordinary. Looking back, I realize how much this moment changed me. It wasn't just the experience itself, it was what came after. At first, I struggled to make sense of it. Was it real? Was it some kind of vivid dream brought on by stress or a medical event? Even now, I'm not entirely sure what to believe. But one thing is certain. I've never been the same since. In the days following that experience, I began to notice things I'd previously ignored. The way sunlight filters through the trees, the sound of birds in the morning, the quiet joy in small, ordinary moments. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could see the world more clearly. Fasting, which I'd once dismissed as just another ritual, took on a whole new meaning. I decided to try it, not out of obligation or curiosity, but as a way to recreate the stillness I'd felt in that extraordinary place. My first attempt was humbling. It wasn't easy, and I found myself wrestling with all the discomforts I'd expected: hunger, irritability, restlessness. But I also noticed something surprising. The noise in my mind began to quiet. It wasn't just physical hunger I was facing, it was the hunger for distraction, for constant stimulation. Fasting forced me to sit with myself, to confront thoughts and feelings I'd been avoiding. And in that stillness, I began to find clarity. I remember one particular day, midway through a fast, when I sat in my living room and simply listened. No phone, no TV, no distractions, just me in the silence. At first, it was uncomfortable, even unsettling. But as I sat there, a sense of peace began to wash over me. I wasn't doing anything special, yet I felt deeply connected to something greater than myself. Even now, I wonder, was this connection always there, waiting for me to notice? Or had the experience I'd gone through opened a door to something new? I also began to reflect on the deeper implications of fasting. It wasn't just about clarity for me, it was about compassion. When you strip away the excess, you start to see what truly matters. You notice the struggles of others, the ways we're all connected, the importance of kindness and presence. I started to see fasting as a metaphor for life itself. We live in a world that constantly demands more consumption, more productivity, more noise. But what if the key to fulfillment isn't adding more, but subtracting? What if the most profound insights come not from chasing, but from stopping, listening, and being present? Of course, there's always the question of what really happened to me that day. Was it a near-death experience? A vivid dream? A spiritual encounter? The logical side of me leans toward the first two. Maybe my brain, in a moment of crisis, created a scenario to help me process what was happening. Maybe it was a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of chaos. But the other side of me, the one that felt the warmth of that light and the peace of that place, wonders if there's more to it. What if it wasn't just my brain? What if there's a realm beyond what we can see, a space where we're reminded of truths we've forgotten? I don't have the answers, and maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to understand everything, but to let the experience shape us in ways we can't fully explain. Even now, I find myself returning to the lessons I learned. Fasting has become a regular practice for me, not in a strict, dogmatic way, but as a way to create space for stillness and reflection. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. And beyond fasting, I've started to approach life differently. I try to slow down, to notice the small joys, to listen more and speak less. I'm far from perfect, but I feel more grounded, more present, more connected. As I share this story, I'm not asking anyone to take it as absolute truth. It's my experience, my interpretation, and I fully acknowledge that it might not resonate with everyone. But I do hope it inspires you to pause, to reflect, and to consider what stillness might reveal in your own life. What would happen if you let go of the noise, even for a moment? What might you discover in the quiet? I don't know what's waiting for you in that stillness, but I do know this. Sometimes, the most extraordinary insights come when we least expect them. When we stop, listen, and open ourselves to the possibility of something greater. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real journey begins. As I look back on this experience, I can't help but marvel at how much it reshaped the way I see life, faith, and even myself. It began with a moment I couldn't explain. An ordinary day turned extraordinary, and it led me down a path of reflection and transformation. The events themselves are vivid in my mind. The light, the figure, the river that revealed so much about who I was and who I could become. And yet, it's the insights that followed that truly linger. The idea that fasting is more than just a physical act. It's a way to quiet the noise, to reconnect with what really matters, to create space for something greater. What fascinates me most is how this experience has left me with more questions than answers. Was it real? A spiritual encounter? Or simply my mind responding to the stress of a physical event? The logical part of me searches for explanations, while another part wonders if some things are meant to remain mysteries. In the end, though, maybe the answers aren't as important as the questions we ask ourselves. This experience made me pause, reflect, and reconsider what I value and how I live. It reminded me to slow down, to listen, to find stillness in a world that's constantly rushing forward. And isn't that the point of any profound experience? Not to give us all the answers, but to challenge us, to inspire us, to open our eyes to new possibilities. For those of you listening, I'm not asking you to believe my story at face value. That's not the point. My hope is simply that it sparks something in you, a curiosity, a willingness to explore, a desire to ask your own questions. What might happen if you allowed yourself a moment of stillness? If you paused, even for a little while, to reflect on your own life? What truths might you uncover? Whether this story resonates with you or not, I hope it leaves you inspired to look deeper, to listen more closely, and to remain open to the unknown. Because sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when we least expect them. And it's in those moments that we have the chance to grow. In the end, maybe life isn't about finding all the answers. Maybe it's about the journey, the questions, and the moments that remind us of what truly matters. And for me, this experience was one of those moments, an invitation to see the world and myself in a whole new way. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story leaves you as thoughtful and curious as it left me.